this silence is exactly what my question is all about. So how can you verleiden, wat is verleiden in het Engels? Seduce dancers who are in the first place movers. How can you seduce dancers to dialogue, to verbally dialogue with dancers, but also with artists from other disciplines?
Again, I think it's what I offer the choreographers I work with. A lot of the choreographers I work with, I mean, Akram is an exception, Dana as well, because they're very verbally, as you could hear. But a lot of the choreographers also have chosen dance originally as their medium, because they're not so fluent with words. And then what I offer them is to practice. Like anything else in life, the more you practice, the better you get at it. So to speak about your work, to dialogue about your work is also a practice. And this is exactly what I offer as a dramaturg, what I do with them. We have a dialogue before they go into the studio, and because they have practiced with me, the next time they have to do it with their dancers or with the other artistic collaborators, they will be more fluent about that. So this is one part. Just the more you do it, the better you get at it. There's no secret, it's as simple as that. The second one is also to create the right conditions that this person needs. So it's a matter of the time, the place, and also the medium. When I was, for instance, working with Cindy Larby and Akram on 0 Degrees, the duet they made together, we were creating it in London. I was staying in the same apartment as Larby, so it was normal that we would have our dialogues in the evening when we were at home. Akram at that time was still a big smoker, so he would have to go out in the street every hour or so. And then I would accompany him, and then we would have a little chat what was happening in the studio like that. With other people, it has happened that, because again, spoken language is one thing, for other people it's easier to do it in a written form. So it has happened that I proposed to the choreographer, let's write letters to each other. Today, Skype is also a great medium in between to have this conversation. So practice, and the second thing, find what works for this two people, the place, the time, and the context like that. When it's with a larger group, finally, like in the studio with dancers, it's also a matter of moderating. It can also be useful, no? To moderate so that everybody can speak at the right time, allow silences to be there as well. It's also a great tool. Other questions? There's 2 of them there, Mike. So.
Yeah, so I'm still thinking about the dialogical practice, and there it becomes possible to think about and become aware of how you can make transfers of your practice. But I'm also thinking, like, does the dialogue has a function in really transferring the actual skills, or is there more than just, let's say, dialogical skills to transfer? And then my second question is how to implement that in the practice based on dialogue.
Again, I think the example that Dana was giving is a great example that when people, especially like in this case, an audience, when you want to create a piece where you want the audience to dialogue with each other about topics. I mean, all the videos are available on YouTube, and if the last one that you continue ends with a very emotional discussion between 2 older German ladies who lived through the Second World War, and one says, I'm still proud to be German, and the other says, yeah, but I was called a Nazi when I was a child, although I'm Russian. So, and it's by having this dialogue that they both look at the same thing from a completely different perspective. And that they kind of start to understand each other and the emotions that are behind it. And it's because Dana created an artistic context, and that she's also guiding people in the process, that kind of exchanges are possible. I think in today's, I mean, this is, remember, since you're not asking, one of the questions that were sent in advance was also, can art be political? I think every art is political, but today it's become extremely important that the artwork is, again, addresses the main questions of society and does it in dialogue with the audience. We come from a tradition where, again, it's a Western tradition. It's maybe 19th, 20th century, and it's only in the West that the artists on stage don't dialogue with the audience. In any other culture and at any other time, this was a very active thing. And this is something we're going back to, and that contemporary choreographers such as Dana, such as theatre directors such as Lotte van den Berg, put at the core of their artistic practice. Also in visual arts, this is what they call, more and more visual artists create work to have a dialogue with the audience like that. I'm not sure whether it directly answers your question, but some examples.
If you say it like this, then I have a tendency to think like by talking to each other, it becomes able to redefine the skills that you have in a different context.
Yeah. And again, the example is, the dialogue is also, I mean, she gives a great example. The dialogue is not just talking. It is by physicalizing your beliefs.
Exactly.
It is choreographing. Because she also said, she uses her tools as a choreographer, as a dancer. Because if people would have to talk directly, it would be much harder. But because they go through a process, and first, it's where I stand in the space that so first there's it helps them to go into the dialogue, by physicalizing first, before they actually go into a discussion about it.
Guy, just coming from the old generation of dancers, we always believed that we danced for the fourth wall.
Mm.
And it was this fourth wall, and then there was always this distance between us and them.
Mm.
And for me, this is a very interesting development, listening to you talk, and how we bring that across also to the performing students, that actually there isn't a fourth wall.
Mm.
And I would like to know what your opinion is. Is that something one does now with these guys, to actually have workshops on how one creates a better dialogue, or even down to the fact of simply empathy with your audience?
Again, as I said, I think this thing of the fourth wall is a very recent phenomenon. I think it only is in the 20th century, and it's only in Western society. In all other cultures and in all other times, art, and performing arts in particular, was bringing together the community for celebrations, for sharing, and we have to go back to that. The whole discussion, like art for art's sake and community art, is something that was only a problem in, again, Western Europe, maybe a little bit in North America, and they were considered in opposition with each other, but actually they're the same. And you feel that the time is right, and also the younger generation of artists believe. I mean, you can still be great performers, and there's still a stage to be performed on. The new forms don't exclude the other. I mean, somebody like Dana, she's one of the most amazing performers of her generation, and for sure a lot of the Forsyth work is also on stage in a more traditional form. But parallel to that, Forsyth himself has been developing a lot of work that is interactive between the audience, whether it's these choreographic dialogues, or whether it's the choreographic objects where the audience themselves go through an experience by a kind of installation piece.
Yeah. I have a question too. It's related to the topic we are dealing with with the first years. You're researching how dance has a function in society, and they have to do it through the body. Your title says imaginative bodies. In your introduction, I've not heard the body yet a lot, only as a dancer. But so, one question is, how can bodies dialogue? Because I think every chapter of your book does this, but it would be good if you give a couple of examples, like the mythical of City Library. And the second question is, what is the power of embodiment today? Because dancers not only train to dance on a stage in a choreography, dancers have other powers, and it's like superpower, right? So I want to know, what do you think the power is?
No, absolutely. I mean, my way into dance was, I first studied linguistics and languages, then I studied theater, and only then I came to dance. So I started with language, and I discovered the body at the end. Like I sometimes say, like in the beginning, only my head was developed, and only afterwards my whole body started to be integrated. And originally, with my theater background, when I started to write about dance as a young newspaper critic, I didn't understand at all how they did it, choreographers and dancers, for instance, how their body memory functioned with my kind of training. So it was really about, my original interest in dance was really about curiosity, not understanding. And then growing into it, becoming, as Dirk said, a curator, spending more time in the studio with artists, becoming a dramaturg, and today also having a performance practice that is physically involved, I got more and more passionate about dance, because I think what dance does is exactly that. It takes the knowledge that exists in other fields, art fields, but also in science, in sociology, in anthropology, and it embodies it. The knowledge that is already there, but is often like only at that part of the body, they completely embody it. And this is also for me why dance is the most interesting interdisciplinary art form. That it has, all through its history, it has studied the knowledge from other disciplines, music, visual arts, literature, theater, and it has integrated it on the level of the body like that. And also now, we're fortunate that through this integration, there's also a generation of major dance artists that not only integrate it, but is also very articulate about it, because they're very able to talk about it as well, so to convince it. One of the things when we were doing these original talks, which were called the body language talks in Seldes Wells, it was each time for, people had to pay tickets for them, and it was, most of the time was sold out, like a 150 seats theater. And what surprised us that a lot of people came from other fields of arts to listen to these talks. And one of the feedback that always came back was that they were so surprised about how articulate the choreographers were about their work. So there's something about integrate, the embodiment is a way to integrate and then giving it back like that. And then for sure the body has also its own knowledge systems. You mentioned the chapter in the book with the dialogue with Sidi Larbi, Cherkaoui. It's called The Mythic Body. Myth is also the title of a big production that Larbi made, I think in 2007 or 2008, and I was his dramaturg. And this idea for this production, we took the idea that all myths, so all storytelling, is about the body. This was his, and we took this from a small book which is called Myth and the Body, which is another dialogue between Stanley Kellerman, who's one of the founders of somatic therapy in the States, and Joseph Campbell, one of the big philosophers on Western mythology. And they say all myths, all stories are about the body. It's about birth, it's about death, and it's about all the stages of transformation in between. And they say like DNA is like our DNA is the kind of scientific way of understanding the body. Myths is the way to understand the body, but through art and through storytelling. And this was the main starting point for Larbi to create this piece, in which he stimulated all his dancers to create mythical images from their own cultural background, and then the whole piece was a kind of encyclopedia of all these images, also for the audience to experience it, and in the kind of multicultural, intercultural dialogue.
I didn't read your book, but when I see the title, I'm wondering how new this topic is. Because when I think about dialogue and performance practice, I'm now in my third year of the Dance Academy, and we actually did it already in the first year with the creation project. We did it in the second year. We had talks with dramaturgs. And now in the third year we also go to the Nieuwe Vorst. We see we see work of young makers, and they are asking for our opinion about it. So actually it feels really natural to do it already, or to ask classmates about their opinion. So is the book really, does it give you is it only nice to read how, for example, Akram Khan and Sidi Larbi made their pieces, or is it also really, does it give me something how I should dialogue when I'm making my piece? Because I don't have the feeling that that's really new or something.
No. Again, for today's presentation, I'm only gave you what is actually the introduction of the book. Afterwards, each dialogue goes into very specific, the way that this particular artist that I'm dialoguing with. I'm sorry for that. Is it still on? I like to dialogue with my hands, as you already know. And I can't dialogue. So it really goes into that each time, the specific, the way that this artist thinks about their work with a lot of examples. And this is the main focus of the book, to give you an insight in how all these major choreographers think and create. Because this is also, personally, the kind of literature I like to read most. I like to read about how artists think and how they work. And you're right, it's not a new subject. I mean, to be honest, I don't believe, again, this is a whole other discussion, but the concept of new is again an invention of, I think, of our society is very new. It's a new topic, newness, because again, in most cultures, I think the history of art, there may be only 4 or 5 big topics that come back each time, and that each generation has to find their own way to articulate these topics. And this is the generation of the people that are working now. The other important thing is, I do think that, again, what I said before, that as artists, we practice this dialogue, but big parts of society don't practice them anymore. If you look at, for instance, politics, with the elections in the States, with the upcoming elections in Holland, these are not dialogues. Because the difference is that people are there they have already made an opinion before they enter into a conversation. They don't listen to each other. They just try to convince each other, I'm right, you're wrong. A real dialogue is just this open process of discovery where you ask me a question and I have to kind of answer it in the moment. And hopefully we both discover something new for ourselves that we haven't defined in advance like that. So I do think that there are big parts of society that should practice more dialogue. And that's again why then artists like Dana are kind of organizing, or Lotte van den Berg are organizing dialogues for the audience also to practice and experience it like that.
Yes, I have a question from Kim, and it's 2 questions related to each other. What have you learned over the past 3 years about transferable skills of the dance artist? And did your position change in these years? Is transferable skills still an effective and fruitful way to define the value of dance for society and other sectors?
Again, when I was, this is not this book, but on the platform that Fontys is developing, and I'm going to kind of keep my hands together, so to avoid. On the platform that Fontys is developing, I also had a number of dialogues with people like Dana again, but also Andrew, who will do a presentation next week, I think. And I think originally, when we think about skills of artists, we think about the very specific skills, the technical skills of being a dancer. And for sure, I think they're very important. But if you think about transferable skills, it is this other level. It is about knowing how to dialogue knowing how to collaborate, knowing how to practice. Again, it sounds very kind of simple, but to develop a daily practice and the discipline of doing that, this is a huge skill. That again, in a lot of parts of society, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, which are the examples that Senate studied, people don't have these skills anymore because the way that the work is organized like that. To work with groups of people is such a basic skill that is so important. And as a choreographer, dancer, you always work with people. You cannot, even if you're making a solo, you have a team around you. So the group dynamics, group psychology, these are for me the level of skills that is most valuable for society today.
I'm wondering if, despite the definition of the word dialogue, you think that it's possible to have a dialogue with yourself in a creation process? Maybe if there's not another person available, or if you just want to know deeper for you?
No, absolutely. And like for instance, I was also teaching a workshop here at the International Choreographers Week on Sunday and Monday. And it was about how to dialogue about your own creative process. But before you start with somebody else, you should also practice with yourself. And there are different ways. The thing is that we also have to think about, we're all unique in the way that we creatively think. And we're also all unique in what we kind of need as input for ourselves to stimulate our creativity or imagination. And we're also unique in what is our preferred output. So you have to find, for some people it's words, for other people it's drawing, for other people it's listening. So what we did, for instance, in the workshop is also to practice different ways to dialogue on paper with yourself, and then immediately translate it into words by explaining what you draw or wrote on paper to someone else like that.
I know that this may be considered as kind of a subjective question, but since you work a lot with dialogues within performance arts, I just want to ask you, what do you think are the important elements between for having a successful dialogue between the audience and the artist?
This is my personal conviction as a dramaturg, but it's also been studied now, for instance, in neuroscience. That is, how do you keep an audience engaged? And there's two things that have to happen both. You need recognition and you need surprise. If there's only recognition all the time, people will get bored. If there's only surprise, it will be hard for people to get into what you propose them. So when you create, you have to think about how do you want to balance that? How do you want to bring in for people to recognize things? And this can be, the recognition can be to their own life, to society, but you can also build in the recognition inside the piece. That's why variation, repetition, recognition, and counterpoint are such great compositional tools like that. And then my own understanding is that as an artist, you always use some personal elements to create. I don't think even if you make the form can be very abstract, but all the artists I worked with, they use some personal memories, some personal stories, part of their physical identity or their cultural identity. They use it as a source for their creation. Then they find a form, and the form is really to transform this personal into something that can be presented for an audience. And if the form is well articulate, it will trigger memories, stories in the imagination of the audience. And the stories that the audience have, the memories, don't have to be the same as the one that are put into the work. But this is how we engage with each other. And that's also why I think, for instance, storytelling is probably the oldest and one of the first performing art forms, where somebody told the stories of a community to share it again with that community, and the community would recognize part of the story. So this is how I feel like the engagement, the dialogue with an audience always happens.
A quick follow-up question. So because of this recognition and this element of surprise, do you think that it's quite hard for example, artists from the Western culture or artists from the Eastern culture to transfer their medium to another region, or from Eastern to Western or the other way around?
No, again, this is the other thing is that we there's a very interesting. For me, there's a lot of study about reception, what they call reception theory, how people receive your work in arts. And one of the most interesting ones is a British philosopher. He's called Goffman, and he talks about frame theory. And he says, like, again, when you create art, you not only create your work, but you also create frames around the work. And some of these frames are physical frames, the choice of the theater, the set, the lighting, but a lot of these frames are also mental frames. The title is a big frame, the information you give in a program brochure is another frame, and the audience also comes to see your show with their frames. And the culture you belong to is also a big important frame. And in order to communicate, for sure, there has to be some overlap. They don't have to be identical, but if they're completely separate, then this might also kind of block the communication. So it's also how to think about how do you create this overlap between frames, or how do you as an artist create frames around your work so that the audience with their frame can find this way of understanding like that.
Hello. Now, students always think I refer to Adele. No. The question I have is related to the importance of dialogue in contemporary dance. Yeah? Because I'm wondering if it is because dialogue is not often happening anymore in the society that it's so strong that a dancer or an artist, because I was talking to someone who was more in the graphical arts in this room, but so an artist can envision and can dialogue better because he does the daily practice. So in this way, today in society, he has a big strength, superpower, like I said. Is this really happening today, that this is the strength? And that in other times, when dialogue is stronger outside, the maker or the artist can do art for art's sake? Or is it? I'm wondering about this. You see, what is the contemporary dance arts now about? Is it only and mainly about this dialogue?
You know, I think, to be honest, I think the art for art's sake is limited to 20th century Western art. I think art, as I understand it, was always about, as a ritual practice, was about bringing the community together. And it was, performing arts in particular, was a lot about reenacting something that happened to the individual, like a rite of passage, birth growing up, death, or what had happened to the society at large, like losing a war. And then it would be recreated, reenacted, for the same, giving back to the community, for them to be witnesses to it, to remember it, and also by remembering it, allow it to transform. This is the origin of art. So art was never separated from community. And again, in Western society, this happens. And I think we're now in a fortunate time where it's both happening but also necessary that these come together again. One of the most inspirational books is by a Norwegian author, Adam Krause, and it's called Art as Politics. And he's basically saying, like, this is the way art should go. It should claim again its central position in community, in society, and not be in a separate category or in an ivory tower. And that's also, I think, why we all know that, also because it's a big thing here in Fontys, that like art in the public space, when you bring dance on the street, that it immediately has this resonance with people. And that the theaters are empty is something that I think we created ourselves, and then we have to find ways to bring these two things together again. Like that. You're very in the dark, but
yeah, nice. I was wondering, you said something about the fact that there is not enough dialogue in society, and that society can look at dance because dancers are good at communicating, at dialoguing, but dancers, they have like this common goal, because when you're in a choreography, something like that, you're all working towards the same goal. And I was wondering how society can learn from that, because it's so much broader than doing just a performance. Yeah. So I was wondering how, in a concrete way, can society in general learn from the dialogue of dancers?
Yeah. Again, somebody like Richard Sennett, and there's another one, David Bohm, who is basically a scientist, and also said one of the problems is not we lose our skills, Sennett, or Bohm says one of the problems is also that we become all specialists. So people have become so focused on one small thing that we don't have any shared goal or shared meaning anymore. And the only way to do that is through collaboration and through dialogue like that. And for sure, I mean, on the larger scale, like politics, it's my own, sometimes we feel, as individuals, you feel powerless. How can I go to make these changes for large society? But it's really about starting in your own immediate community, you know. And if you and another example, which is on the platform when it will be public. It's a good example. Like one of the other persons I interviewed, Frank Bock. He was a dancer choreographer. I mean, in the UK before he stopped dancing, and then because he had his experience working in a large-scale dance company in the UK, he went to study group psychology because he was interested in how to work with groups and how can you improve the group dynamics. And until recently, all the literature about group psychology is written by psychiatrists and psychologists of the American Army, because that's also important, like how to manipulate groups, how to have. So then I think it's good that there's now artists thinking about these questions, so that these big questions are not left only to certain fields and certain specialists, but that somebody who has a very different experience working in a dance company says, I'm also going to study group psychology. And then he teaches this to commercial companies, to groups, like Daniel's example, working with immigrants. But he also goes back to arts, and he's also teaching it in, for instance, in Stockholm, where there's also a dance department. He's bringing in his knowledge and sharing it with the students. So this is another thing that we also should think about in education. It's not, the technical skills is the base, but next to that there's also other skills that we have to develop, and then collaborating, working with people, group psychology, these are also skills that might be, find ways to introduce it also in the curriculum already when you're studying. And this is also why this project in the first place was thought of as transferable skills, that we still want, I think the schools still want you to become dancers and artists and choreographers, but already while you're training for that, to imagine that you can all eventually whenever you want and whenever you're ready for it, you can also apply these skills in very different fields, and it's happening more and more with very positive results, I think.
How does social media change like the dialogue, like from your work field perspective?
For sure, and although I'm an older generation, I think I believe in the positive value of that as well. I think, again, in Western society, the written word was for a long time too dominant, especially in academics, that only what is on paper, only the book is valuable. Today, we're going back to a new oral culture, which has a much more power. That's also why I said, like, I prefer to write, first have a dialogue, record it, and then write it in the book, because I think it's much more dynamic, and it's also because then there's space in between, and it's not a truth. It's not my truth. There's in the book. There's 15, 16 different voices that talk to each other, and that's also why things like TED Talks or these are the main sources. The generation of choreographers I work with, Sidi Larbi is a good example. This is also his main source of inspiration. And the written word has still a value, but it shouldn't be that dominant as it used to be. And this is, I think, what is happening through the new technologies, that the oral culture and the written culture are complementing each other. While in the past, the oral culture was always put aside, and especially in cultures where the oral culture was the main way of expressing, that it gives them also back their voice like that.
So what kinds of change do you see there? Like more accurate or?
Again, I think it has to do with the embodiment. I think I can only, when you speak, you can only say what you really know. This is what I believe. On paper, you can kind of put it there, but it's even if you don't understand it fully yourself, like somehow. So there's something about also the oralness is always in the present. So this context like that. So I think it's also a way to revalue different knowledges, but also to test the knowledge. When people, sometimes when I'm writing, when I'm reading things, I feel that the person who has written it himself actually doesn't embody the knowledge or knows. I mean, it can still be very clever writing, but there's something about that it's not the reality, or that the knowledge also has to become too abstract to be useful like that. And again, both have their value, so it's more about being complementary, I think, than one replacing the other.
I'm curious how common you think the ability to dialogue is for dancers, because you mentioned that like you kind of had to train Akram a bit in it, and I think in choreographers it's more of a necessity because you're doing think tanks quite regularly, but as a performer or a dancer on the other side of things, like we go through a lot, we digest a lot, we feel a lot, and we get a lot of input, but I don't think dialogue is actually so common. And I would just be curious on your point of view on this.
Again, you're right. No, like when there's a new paradigm, the old paradigm continue to exist, and I'm sure there's also still old-fashioned ballet companies and other companies where there's very little space given for the performers and the dancers to dialogue. But most of the contemporary choreographers that I'm interested in, I work with, they do give, and they do want also their dancers in the creative process, not just to execute, but also to contribute actively to the creation of the work. And also as a performer, again, you choose as an entrance door the thing that attracts you, that you feel most comfortable with, and maybe you've chosen dance because expressing yourself through the body is what you feel is your strength. But later on in your career, if you look at the careers of people like Dana, who have a career of over 30 years, you will start to integrate these other elements as well. And you will start to integrate spoken word language. And again, this is also how I think we, both as human beings, as artists, develop, is that we have a kind of innate set of skills which we develop, but then we also have to diversify our skills if we want to have a long-term sustainable career. I started dancing on stage in a professional context when I was past 40 because a choreographer that challenged me to do that. And I've been doing it now for the last 15 years. I don't think I'm the most skilled dancer because I never had the basic training, but I've become a much better dramaturg when I have to accompany other people because I now have this experience myself like that. And I also enjoy doing from time to time, even if I feel it's still very hard just to prepare myself physically for it like that. And this, I think, everybody should at one point in their career, you're challenged to diversify and integrate all the skills that maybe in the beginning you thought were not so relevant to your own work like that.
Just to follow up, I'm just really curious about if this ability to dialogue is a transferable skill of a dancer, or is it a skill that tends to get transferred to a dancer at some point in their life, that it's something that is really important and useful for us, but it has to be given to us, or if you have found it to be quite natural for a lot of...
Again, I think a skill you develop through practice. And the more you practice, the better you get at a skill. And because of the collaborative nature of performing arts, this conversational skill, this dialogue skill is already there. And you practice it on a daily basis like that. And again, there's a huge variety of doing that. I mean, I remember years ago, and I mean, this was in the 80s when I was still a critic, going into a studio, and the choreographer was like talking to his dancers the whole length of a rehearsal, but only using sounds, never using any kind of words that had a meaning attached to it. Because this was his way of dialoguing, communicating. And again, the first time I saw it, it's like, what is this? But it worked. Because, I mean, again, they were doing it on a daily basis, so they understood each other perfectly like that. And also, so for me, this also, it's again about being creative with that. So not only use, I mean, also find different ways and different mediums to do that like that. And one is not better than the other, they're all complementary like that. I think we should kind of slowly...
Is there a question from our friends?
And there is a question from Rihanna. I wonder what, in your opinion, determines something being or becoming a dialogue. Could this dialogue also be the relation between you, the self, and someone or something else, the other?
I think the entrance in why do you want to dialogue with somebody? I'm talking into a creative process is always a form of curiosity. It is because you want to get to know the other person, or you think that there's some element that this other person, of his experience, his knowledge, that you want to integrate in yourself. And that's also, I think, how you, as an artist, and again, somebody like Akram Khan or Sidi Larbi Sherkawi are very good examples. They were able, if they were able to develop themselves so quickly at a very young age as choreographers and become so major, is because they had this capacity of dialoguing and also immediately finding the people they want to dialogue with, whether it's their performers or their artistic collaborators. This is how they develop themselves, not being, okay, this is what I know, and I repeat what I know. No, I'm going to look for other people who have knowledge that I'm curious about, that I want to integrate in my own work and career, and I'm going to, through collaboration, through exchange, we'll both grow. And that was also when they created together 0 Degrees. It was 2005. They started both their career in 2000, so they maybe had a career of, each made 3 or 4 pieces, but already at that stage, in 0 Degrees, they exchanged all the knowledge they had with each other, and immediately afterwards, you felt like they were already at a different level in their career like that. And they both systematically have been doing that. So Larby, for instance, always also, not all of his work for sure, because now also there's more and more work that is commissioned and where he often doesn't have the time, but his own creations, you would always see them also as a learning process. And by choosing the people who he was collaborating with, by having an artistic exchange and dialogue, he would also develop himself, continue to develop himself, his own skill set.
You okay?
Yeah, that's
good. First, thank you for your attention, for you being here, and for your very interesting questions. Thank you very much. And at the same time, Guy, again, thank you for your answers, for your dialogue, for your intent, and what you probably leave behind, because people are going away a little bit different with something in their backpack. But thank you very much, Guy, for your talk.
Thank you for...